We had him earlier. He's the commercial manager, digital at Fox Sports. Please make welcome Debs Majumdar.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, delegates. Welcome to one of, hopefully, which will be one of the very exciting panels today. For those of you who were paying attention earlier, Ed Wyatt mentioned, who's a money and sport veteran, said, I don't know what to expect in the next 5 years. And do you know what? If you rewound this conference 5 years ago, I don't think we would have ever thought esports would have been one of the key topics that we were going through. Before I call up my panelists today, I just quickly want to go through some stats in and around the wonderful world that is esports. Globally, obviously, the audience now has hit 380 million, and by 2021, this is now forecast to basically clear 500 million, which is absolutely massive. There's a projected industry value by 2020 to hit 1.5 billion, and the global revenue for this year alone has been forecasted to around $980 million, which is 38% year-on-year growth, which is absolutely massive for any kind of sport in its infancy. We mentioned before that it's obviously a very heavy millennial haven. And then finally, in terms of capitalising on esports, is the customers don't mind if there is sponsorship in this space, but make sure it's relevant, make sure it's contextual, and make sure it doesn't piss them off. So without further ado, I do want to call up all of the panellists. Dharpan Randhawa from McLaren, Ben Sellenger from Bastion Live, Joey Brander from First Serve Partners, and Rossi Biddle from Fantasy Sports. Dharpan, we might start with yourself. McLaren, there's a lot of history, a lot of heritage, and a lot of pedigree in your brand. You've dived in the world of esports. What's brought on this particular move, especially with a brand as with so much heritage in the F1 space?
Yeah, thank you for having me. So we actually stumbled into it, to be honest. We started a program last year called World's Fastest Gamer. We knew we had to do something around esports. We didn't quite have a very, very strategic plan, and it developed and it became organic. And World's Fastest Gamer, anyone from any device, anywhere can play. And you qualify, and the winner, Rudy Van Buren, ended up being a very, very fast sim racer. And he's now transitioned from sim racing into driving on a professional seat on a team. And what we found was, if you're playing FIFA, the transferable skills are never there. You're never going to be playing for FC Barcelona. But if you are a good sim racer, we did some cognitive testing, etc., with our applied technology business. We found that a lot of the transferable skills were about 85%. So we thought, wow, let's see if we can put this kid in a car. We're either going to be geniuses or we're going to kill this kid. So luckily, we were geniuses, and Rudy did really, really well. So it's now transitioned into the McLaren Shadow project, transitioning virtual world into real world, and it's been interesting. To answer your question as to why we're doing it, I mean, we've been around for a long time. We have 197 million fans. We've just spent quite a bit of money understanding the demographic and the depth of our fan base, and it showed that a lot of them were young, a lot of them were consume content in a different way, and so we decided to venture into this, and so far so good.
Thank you. Ben, you've got an interesting view on this. Obviously, your company Bastion's got skin in the game. You both own a team, and also you're on the other side of the fence where you're working directly with brand partners as well. What I want to know is basically, how do non-traditional brands get involved in this space? There's a lot of stigma around it. People say there's a lot of risk.
They get involved exactly the same way that they get involved in traditional sports. I mean, the verticals, the ecosystem of esports largely mirrors what brands already understand. to be the case in traditional sports. It's just a different demographic. And yes, there's issues with authenticity, but they already exist in traditional sports. Some of those challenges we're already seeing on behalf of the brands that invest in some of the football codes or cricket, where it's not about branding anymore. It's about content and authenticity and legitimacy and engaging with audiences. And they're the same challenges that the brands face in esports. So it shouldn't be something that brands are scared of. Certainly, esports probably isn't a full solution for a brand because it is such a narrow audience. But in terms of the audience that you threw up on the screen before, to speak to that sort of millennial Gen Z, we certainly take the view that there's no better platform to use than esports for brands.
Joey, you had your keynote before around the overall future of sport. What I actually want to know, and anecdotally, a lot of the delegates came up to me and asked me this, is esports, is it the athlete, is it the team, or is it just the game? What's the tribalism that kind of drives this space?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all the above, and I think that esports is certainly happening. I think that over the past couple of years, there were discussions of, what exactly is this, and what exactly do we make of this? Is this something that's actually going to become part of the true fabric of the greater sports ecosystem or the professional sports ecosystem? And I think that that's no longer a question by any means. I think that it's certainly made its mark, and the numbers don't lie. That esports has surpassed the MLB and the NHL in terms of global viewership. It's Goldman Sachs projected it'll surpass the NFL in global viewership within the next couple of years. You see leagues starting to franchise. We at FSP invested in one of the top esports teams in the world a couple of months ago, one of only 4 teams to own both an Overwatch franchise and a League of Legends LCS, or now LEC franchise. And you see leagues starting to franchise and buy-in prices at 35-40 million in the case of the Overwatch League, and 10 million and up in case of the LEC. So you're starting to see it already rival in every aspect of it. Professional sports, you see athletes like both of the guys I was up here on stage with getting very heavily involved in esports. You see major professional sports team owners being involved in esports. In the Overwatch League, for example, Robert Kraft, Jerry Jones, the Cronkies, the Wilpons, all those folks are involved within esports organizations. So, the infrastructure is in place, and the viewership certainly doesn't lie. And I think that this is one of the most important conversations that we can have at any conference or event related to sports, because I think there's very little in sports that has the upside that esports has across all of those avenues, whether you're talking about the athletes themselves, the teams, the leagues, the tournaments, the events, the possible broadcast or media rights, both digital and traditional, sponsorship opportunities, all those different things. It's certainly provides a lot of interesting upside.
It's great to see some of those major codes and teams now obviously diversifying their revenue and other products there. Rossi, quick one just around the fan, basically. You've got right now a first generation of esports fans. Typically, you would have followed a team or an athlete because your dad or your mum followed the Tigers, and therefore you naturally followed them. What's kind of driving this at the moment, and where do you see it heading to next?
Teams have learned extremely well how to market to the actual audience before even brands, endemic and non-endemic brands, have actually done that. You look at Fnatic, one of the top teams, most marketable. People are drawn to them because of their marketing strategies from a fan point of view. The second thing, and we've just talked about it in regard to how they consume content, everything's free. You get onto Twitch and you can just watch for free. We talk about the numbers going past NFL, but we're talking about an entire industry. Esports as an industry, not surpassing traditional sports just yet. It will do, but the way that the fan consumes, sits at their PC, has 4 tabs open, watching games, is a lot easier to consume than subscription to NFL Network, and subscription to NFL Network or Major League Strike Zone. And that's where the fans at the moment are embracing, because everything is actually being given to them. Once they have to start outlaying some money, we'll see.
Jen's probably one for all of you, just on the distribution model there. It's not the traditional means. It's not obviously selling the rights to X publisher. You said Twitch basically give it away for free, and obviously they command scale at large. Where do you see the trends, I guess, heading, Joe, having visibility globally as well? Where do you see this going next once these behemoths kind of really awaken?
Yeah, and I think that when you talk about consumption or media rights and things like that, especially when you talk about Twitch, that yes, it's free for the end user or the consumer, but it's certainly not free for Twitch, especially when it comes to the bigger leagues. And you're starting to see media rights deals that are growing exponentially. Twitch and the Overwatch League have a 2-year, $90 million deal. Just for digital rights alone, the Overwatch League has a traditional television deal with ESPN and ABC, where their playoffs and finals were shown on obviously some of the biggest networks in the world and some of the biggest networks in North America. As more leagues start to franchise, obviously the two big ones and the Call of Duty World League possibly franchising or moving to a franchise model in 2019, as those leagues start to franchise, those larger media rights deals, both local television deals and national, international television deals, are going to be even more important to the bottom line of both the leagues and the teams. The leagues, when it comes to revenue sharing amongst the organizations, like traditional sports leagues, or at least traditional sports leagues in the States, are the way that they're structured. And when you're talking about teams and their ability to monetize local television deals and things like that, just like any, especially major American sports league, NBA, NFL, NHL, MLB, all those teams are incredibly reliant, and the leagues are incredibly reliant on those big deals. And I think that that's something that a lot of folks in esports certainly anticipate being the same case, and certainly reaching those kind of numbers that those other leagues are getting, because like you said, I mean, it's absolutely transcendent in terms of the growth of viewership, in terms of the people that are both attending in person and watching online. I mean, in the States, esports events are selling out major NBA arenas all over the country, Staples Center, the Barclays Center, even for the Call of Duty World League in Columbus, Ohio, which is a pretty irrelevant city. No offense to if anyone here happens to be from Columbus. I would highly doubt it here that someone's from Columbus, Ohio, but it's a pretty irrelevant city, right? But they still sold out the Columbus Blue Jackets arena. It's like 20,000 seats. So, both in person and in terms of viewership, the numbers speak for themselves, and I think those deals are going to continue to grow. And I think in terms of what you said, in comparing the viewership between traditional sports and esports, and just how much it can grow, and what leagues it can surpass, and what sports it can surpass, I think the other thing to remember as well is that for so many people around the world, esports is significantly more relatable than traditional sports, and that is obviously something that draws viewers, especially when you're talking about young people. There's a trend in the NBA where guards always sell better than big men, right? When you're talking about shoes, when you're talking about jerseys. And the reason is because for most people, they can look like Steph Curry. A lot of people can be, 6'2" and 160 pounds soaking wet and play like him. But I'm not going to be LeBron, right? The two guys that were on stage today, I'm certainly not going to be Meta World Peace, and I'm not going to be able to run a 4.3 40 time and have arms this big like Roman. But when I look at esports athletes, they look more like everyone in this room. The skills are something I can play myself, right? Myself and my friends can go play the same, obviously at a different level, but the same event, the same sport that they're playing. I can watch online on Twitch and actually ask questions and communicate with and like and share and be part of the dialogue with the very best athletes in the world. And I can even be playing myself while I'm watching them play and share notes and everything else. So I think that relatability has been one of the biggest causes of that increase in viewership, but I think it's going to continue growing from here on out.
I think to an extent, in terms of the distribution model as well, that on that continuum between free-to-air broadcast, subscription model, that's where traditional sports have always lived, and then probably down the other end of the spectrum, which is over-the-top distribution, which is where esports have traditionally lived, not ring-fenced, everyone can watch it. it feels like sport and esports going to meet somewhere in the middle. Slowly, esports are moving closer to a model where there are rights fees, where there's subscriptions attached, and we see sports also moving away from a free-to-air model or huge rights fees and trying to move into over-the-top and subscription-based models. So both are sort of acclimatising to this environment, this new environment in and around millennials and Gen Z. And I think they probably meet somewhere in the middle. And just on the numbers, and to provide a bit of context, because I was listening before, and obviously Matt talking about the President's Cup, to provide a bit of context around the volume of people that are watching a lot of these games. Matt spoke about Justin Rose at the Olympics, and the fact that when he got the gold medal, there was something like 80 million people globally watching. There's a League of Legends team in Australia called the Direwolves, which maybe a few people have heard of, maybe not, that qualified for the World Championships for League of Legends this year. And during the preliminary rounds, so not even the main rounds, they happened to be playing a match after two Chinese teams. It streamed live to over 100 million concurrent viewers globally. This is a local team out of Sydney going out to 100 million concurrent viewers, which is quite ridiculous. 95 million of them, admittedly, out of China, but still a massive global audience for what wasn't even a match that really counted. It was a play-in match. So the numbers are quite phenomenal.
Rossi, I noticed you taking the mic and getting up out of your chair a little bit, so I know you want to say something too.
Yeah, I was just following on from what Ben was saying, just in regard to trying to find the right meet in the middle. The demographic don't actually have that disposable income to pay subscription fees the same way the demographic of a traditional NFL fan or a traditional US fan. And so while, yes, everybody is aspirational as a gamer, to your point, where they want to watch the best players, they want to be able to interact with the best players and feel that they can then go to the next level. The way that they're really consuming videos, replays, is actually quite outstanding. You talk about the Direwolves having 100 million, but the replays have been over 200 million on YouTube, because people go back, they do research, they keep on watching it. So as long as it's always free for the fan that is the 18 to 34-year-old that can't actually afford to pay the subscription model at the moment, then the industry itself will absolutely grow, and it will grow exponentially.
So it's interesting. I mean, everything you guys said is spot on. But from our perspective, what's really interesting is we're looking at this as a way for young kids, boys and girls, young adults, to get into our sport. So traditionally, if you wanted to become a racing car driver, you'd have to start with karting. Karting's a really expensive sport, and that's why we haven't seen a Formula One champion, a lot of Formula One champions from developing countries, because the karting program there don't exist. I mean, Fernando Alonso, our driver, recently committed to opening 40 schools in China, karting schools, but even that's going to be expensive and it's going to take time. So with sim racing, what we've found is, season one we had 31,000 entrants. Season two, currently, which is still happening, we've got about 537,000 entrants, which is over a 1,600% rise. And a lot of them are kids, young people who are really, really good at driving and sim racing, who all of a sudden have got a fire in their belly, thinking that, hey, I've got a dream. Maybe if Rudy can do it, maybe I can do it. And we think that by next year, sim racing in this part of the world is going to increase even more. So we're focusing on participation because we've got a different end goal, and we're looking for partners who will want to commercialize with that. But then over the top of all of that is really good viewing and really good content and really good broadcast opportunities as well. So the whole thing is really interesting from 360.
Just a side note, mate, and I'm just going to address the elephant in the room. Don't come over and attack me, but McLaren haven't had the best run rate on the track over the last year, but yet in the press I've noticed you've continued to sign new partners up. Is that because of the esports injection, or what's kind of driving that then?
Thanks for bringing that up. Well, we haven't had the best year on the track. Everyone knows that. It's no secret. And that's Formula One. We're a team. We're in a slum. But we've also been around for 50 years. The brand is a big brand. We've spent, we've got obviously our Formula One business, we've got a supercar business, and we've got a very big technology business as well. But to answer your question as to why we've signed so many partners is we've got different parts of the business adding value and doing different types of deals. But we also have spent a lot of money this year understanding our fan base. 197 million fans around the world, 58 million here. We've done tons of research with third parties across the world to really understand who these people are, how they're consuming our content, how they're viewing our content, socioeconomic background, how they spend, all that sort of stuff, that depth and analytics. So then we're able to go to our new partners and existing partners to add value. And when you can start having confident conversations with your partners about how to talk to our fan base and create content, whether that's through esports, whether that's through our racing programs, activations at 21 races around the world, you know, you don't have to be doing too well on track, I guess.
Careful, they'll start quoting you on Twitter for that one. Speaking of Twitter, please do send through some of your questions, because we do only have about 30 more minutes with these gentlemen here. What I do want to put out to all of you, but probably more my first two delegates immediately to the right of me, there are multiple delegates in the room now. They understand esports is massive. It has audience at scale. It's a premium environment as well. It's up and coming. It's a new audience. That's all good and well, but how does my brand X now get involved with esports? I don't have the budgets of the likes of a Dell or a Macca's who have spent a lot of money in this space. Are there ambush ambush approaches? If I can't afford the front of jersey sponsorship or anything like that, what's my best way in?
Ambush, you can talk about that.
Go, Ben.
Thanks, Dharpan. I think a brand's approach largely starts the same as they would for a sport, which are what are the objectives? Who do they want to reach? Is it a business-to-consumer play? Is it a business-to-business play? And that will start influencing. Do they look at a publisher-based level? Do they look at a league-based investment? Do they look at teams or franchises, influencers, individual streamers? There's any number of different ways in which you can touch the industry, engage with the audience that you want to reach, exactly the same as you would through sport. And a lot of the entry points and the price points are a lot lower at the moment. A lot of franchises like the one that we operate and a lot of leagues are looking to work with brands to get proof of concept so that we can go back to market and demonstrate what we know to be the case, which is that esports is an amazing engagement platform to speak to an audience that is hard to reach. They don't watch free-to-air, they don't engage in traditional media, they block ads, they're not engaging in structured sports participation either. I mean, the concentric circles of audience, it's not that they're not fit, they're millennials, they care about what they eat, they care about what they put in their body, they care about being fit, but they don't necessarily engage in structured sport or watch structured sport. So it's almost this greenfield audience that esports provides access to. So there's any multitude, but it starts with what's the objective of the sponsor?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, entry-level sponsorship for a Formula One team is millions of pounds, but for esports program, I mean, we're working with partners now because we are in an infancy in our program, but to use the narrative, to use the platform that we have to speak to their younger audiences and their current customers. So a good example is Htc Vive. We've just done a deal with them around virtual reality. They've got a ton of customers who wanted a new form of content around sports. Virtual reality, a lot of people think it's all about games, but it's not. Their biggest content for virtual reality is education. So they wanted to get these younger audiences into sports. So for them, it was a strategic partnership. For us, we tap into a virtual reality component for people to consume our content in a different way. So it's not always about investment and budgets and money. Sometimes it's also strategic And then of course, you know, there's money involved, but we're not talking huge budgets right now. But as we grow, as we grow with our partners, you know, that could change.
Joey, out of the US, sort of the tier 2 and tier 3 sponsors, have you seen some non-traditional brands, I suppose, start entering into this market, either be it a sort of more of a low touch or just a complete ambush?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you talk about a lot of the you know, North American teams, a lot of the, I mean, really teams all over the world, you're seeing you're very much seeing tier 1 brands you know, enter into the space. I mean, with our team, for example, we have a deal with Mountain Dew. We were the first esports team sponsored by Foot Locker. Our League of Legends team was sponsored by Foot Locker this
Why
past
would
year.
esports athletes need fancy shoes? Can I just throw that one out there?
Actually, they need much more than you know, just athletic shoes. Our League of Legends team, for example, we put infrastructure around our teams that rivals that of traditional sports. So our League of Legends team has a full-time nutritionist, physical trainer, massage therapist, sports psychologist, 2 coaches, 3 scouts, the whole thing, general manager. And you know, the same with our new, we're an expansion team into the Overwatch League this year. This upcoming season will be our first year in it, and you know, we're surrounding the Overwatch team with that same kind of infrastructure as well. When you're talking about physical trainer and sports psychologist, nutritionist, the whole thing. So the infrastructure around esports, I mean, it's the same as regular professional sports. You know, when you're talking about you know, once it gets to this point where there's this much money at stake, there's this much you know, of everything at stake, you know, the infrastructure continues to grow along with it. And another just interesting, I guess, anecdote is we were talking to a former professional baseball player, that very well known baseball hitter, one of the all-time great home run hitters, and he was talking about himself and his career, and he had started to research esports, and he said that, you know, if you take away everything we know about the MLB, its 100 and however many year history, that, you know, it's that sport is part of culture and something that's, you know, known and respected. He said, you know, I made however much money by swinging a piece of wood at a ball, right? That's all I did for a living, is I swung a piece of wood at a ball, and that's it, right? And I could do it pretty well, and that's why I've reached what I've done. What's the difference between that and saying that, you know, these esports athletes can think faster than everyone else during the game? They can move and read and react. Their quick twitch muscles are faster than anyone else. You know, I think that there's in terms of mainstream sports, there's a misconception among, you know, is this really a sport? Are these people really athletes? Why do we have this infrastructure around them so they can perform at the highest level? But if you think about it like that, I mean, it's just because one thing is more familiar to us than the other. You know, is saying that this guy is, you know, one of the greatest esports athletes of all time, is that skill really that different or more, you know, ridiculous than saying, hey, you know, that guy made $300 million swinging a piece of wood at a ball, you know, or shooting an orange ball in a hoop. You know, I mean, if you break it down to that level, it's all just different skills and different forms of athleticism and everything else. And you know, the infrastructure in each sport allows those players to perform at the highest level. So that's why Foot Locker came in and you know, have been part of that infrastructure, with our League of Legends team in particular being one of the most, you know, popular games in the world, like you were saying. And yeah, I mean, it's incredible to see the growth. I think that if you would have said 2 or 3 years ago that, you know, that it would already be at this point, or that's the infrastructure that would be around esports, it would have, you know, sounded pretty crazy. But, you know, it's certainly at that point.
It's great to hear that there is all that infrastructure in and around esports now. But Rossi, taking that even further, you're now pioneering fantasy esports. So that's like basically esports on steroids. You've got fantasy teams about players who are playing online. Can you run me through a bit about that world as well?
Yeah, we noticed that there was a big hole from really where traditional sports shot through the roof with the Monday morning quarterbacks. The majority of the conversations around the water coolers in the US during September, October, November is about how a quarterback may or may not have won you your league that week, and his play was detrimental to the success of your actual team itself. And when we started looking at esports, we saw that certainly within League of Legends and certainly within Overwatch, there was a really big opportunity because, one, there is the viewership. We're talking about 100 million people watching two teams going at it. But there's no emotional engagement for the fan. There's no legacy, is what we talked about before, in regard to an actual team itself. And more importantly, there's not a success or failure metric. So what we did was actually develop a scoring algorithm by using players, commentators and casters of League of Legends, which is what we launched with in E3 in June. And we let the community decide what metrics should be a success for a League of Legends player, for actually doing your role in the game. One of the biggest things that annoy me around fantasy soccer is you still got to pick 4 defenders, you still got to pick 4 midfielders and 2 forwards. And you get points if you get a clean sheet as a defender. Now, your defender might be having an absolutely fantastic game, might have shut down the best player on the pitch. But if your left-back's had a brain fade, given away 2 penalties, you're actually your player is still held responsible for his actions. And within fantasy esports, within League of Legends, you've got 5 positions that are so unique, and their roles and responsibilities in the game is actually so unique that you actually have to work together as a team, and you should be rewarded for that. So within the wagering industry, you see just standard scoring, just stock standard. If you kill somebody, 3 points. If you die, it's -1. Doesn't matter what you're doing. By being a non-wagering platform, first and foremost, we appeal to everybody. Absolutely. That entire demographic that we talk about that's got no disposable income or access to a credit card. There's non-wagering whatsoever. There are great prizes being put up by endemic and non-endemic sponsors. But most importantly, it gives the fan an opportunity to discuss how good Reckless was when his pentakill a couple of series ago, or how good Someday was last year through the entire summer split. And it gives the fan a voice and a level of conversation that can then bring new fans in, and understanding. And it's just where we've taken it so far. We're looking forward to launching Overwatch and CSGO and Dota 2 as well. But it really is about just going, this entire industry still doesn't have that metric of what a professional player really should be doing.
So obviously League of Legends and Overwatch are just killing it in this space. Where to next, I suppose, when it comes to more sport-specific esports? Dharpan, you're obviously doing it in the F1 space. In Australia last year, we launched the inaugural E-League competition, which is basically FIFA through the A-League. There's also opportunities now around, obviously, the NBL, NRL as well as footy. Where do you see this, I guess, industry kind of going when it comes to that sport-specific esports?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the interesting things that we've most learned from our time now working or investing in this aspect of the sports industry is that there's a very much a difference between an esports fan and a traditional sports fan, and even the traditional sports fan that is also an esports fan in terms of what esports they like to consume. And that traditionally or typically sports-specific or centered esports just don't do very well in terms of viewership and attendance and things like that. In the U.S., the NBA unveiled their 2K league, and obviously NBA franchises are some of the most have some of the largest fan bases in the world, some of the most popular organizations in the world, and they put their name and brand and resources and marketing efforts behind their esport or their 2K teams. And they had Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, announcing the first pick in the NBA 2K League draft. They had players there. They had the whole thing, and no one watched. And throughout the season, for the most part, no one watched. There just was not interest whatsoever. And you see the same thing with Madden, with NFL football. It's very unpopular in the grand scheme of things, and it's these other games, these more transcendent video game titles that have long histories of being the most popular video game franchises that are doing well as esports, and the next. Or I guess obviously the trend we're seeing as everything continues to grow as leagues moving to that franchise model, and I think the next one that everyone expects will be Call of Duty next year with Activision Blizzard, and although esports is new, gaming certainly isn't, and Call of Duty is a franchise that's been transcendently popular for 15 plus years now. The Overwatch League, Overwatch is a newer game, but is one that is among the highest selling each year that it's been out, and a league that kind of was created with this mindset of creating an esport around it. And it's also important to remember that not every video game can be an esport, because just like traditional sports, it's more than just a competitive event, but it's a competitive event that other people want to watch. So there has to be a broadcast experience that can be created around it. It has to be easy to follow. You have to have the ability to have proper camera angles. You have to have all of these things to create a show or content or a live event around just that particular game, and that's why some games end up doing better at the esports level than others. That's the problem with Fortnite, for example, as an esport. It's incredibly popular all around the world, but there are a lot of questions into how does this work as a viewing experience, as an event, as an esport, when you have 100 different players playing individually. How does it work in terms of creating that program around it? But yeah, so I would say to answer your question that I think Call of Duty will be next, the next big league that's franchised. I would expect that the initial franchises will go for somewhere between 20 and 30 million first year, similar to the Overwatch range, maybe possibly a little more, since the Overwatch League has done really well in terms of meeting and surpassing their first year projections, and some of the work they've been able to do with those early media rights deals. But I definitely think that'll be the next big league to move to that franchise model, and from there you'll see everything continue to grow exponentially.
One observation just around, I think, one of the impacts that esports at the professional level has had. Traditionally, there probably might have been a bit of churn within genres, that a game updates it, puts a good patch out, and they get viewers from it, or they get participants from another game it comes across. And that's probably a common fear for a lot of brands as well. What's next? And at any stage, a publisher can launch a game and maybe drag fans from one to the other. With the growth of esports in specific games, League of Legends, the amount of money that Blizzard's put into Overwatch and probably Call of Duty, what you're seeing is a reduction in that churn, because having those aspirational heroes and all the money at the top end, that the next generation of players coming through are less likely to switch titles, even if there is an incrementally better game, that they want to be that next great player in League of Legends.
I think that's a fantastic point, and I think it's similar to when you're talking about new sports being created, new leagues being created. If we remember UFC, when that was first created, the level of competition in the first few years was not very high, right? I mean, even some of the top performers from the initial few years wouldn't stand a chance against a lot of the athletes today, because they didn't have the infrastructure, the training, the money, all those different things to have the best athletes in the world training all the time with the best programs, the best coaches, the best infrastructure, like you have now, where it is truly, as good as the competition has ever been. The same thing if you watch, early days of any sport compared to where it is now. And I think in esports, you're seeing the same thing, where, like you said, players aren't switching titles now because they have, guaranteed contracts, where a lot of them, especially in the big leagues, are making 6 figures a year guaranteed just for the game alone, let alone endorsement opportunities and things like that. Especially in the bigger leagues, a lot of guys in League of Legends are making a couple $100,000 a year. Even in some of the smaller titles, a lot of the best players in the world are making 6 figures a year and up, fully guaranteed. That's more than a lot of NFL players are making. That's more than a lot of guys like that are are making, and because of all of that involved, and because of the infrastructure around them, that they are training, all day long. They are focusing and physically training, game-specific training for their title. That it's just like we wouldn't have an NBA player switch to hockey, and we wouldn't have a soccer player switch to another sport. It's the same thing, right? These players are training from the time that they're however years old, and they now see that this is a real thing that they can do. They can make a lot of money. They can have a very successful career as an esports athlete, and they're training from that point forward, and that's their game. That's their sport.
Yeah, I mean it's real. It's real. Even when you take the big ones out of the picture, when you look at our industry, I mean Razor's just signed a deal with Williams. We've got the F1 Esports series where all the teams can put in all the teams. I think besides Ferrari, have got a esports team in the competition, and these guys are real athletes. You're right. I mean, our finalists for the McLaren Shadow program are going through. They're in a simulator for 6 hours. They're in a proper simulator that the drivers are in. They've got to condition their necks for G-force. They've got to hydrate the right way. I mean, these guys are in there in real brutal conditions as well. And they cognitive testing as well. I mean, this is a great story. So people say one of the all-time greatest lap ever driven was by Senna in Monaco under heavy rain conditions many, many years ago. And we had this kid come in, and he was training for quite a bit with us, and he was talking to his girlfriend on the phone, went up to the sim, hat backwards, chewing gum, jumps into the sim, and came to 0.0001 of a second to beating the all-time best under perfect conditions in a sim, same movement, same visibility that Senna saw. Now you can argue that it's not real, but I mean that's how hard we're training these kids to do it as well. I mean, we put a camera in front of one of our drivers. I don't know whether it was Fernando or Jenson Button back in the day, where we measured, where we had a camera capturing their face during a lap of a Formula One circuit. It went for 2 kilometers and they blinked 3 times. And that's the same sort of conditioning we're putting these players in, and they can win real money. This is so if you're going to become a sim racer, you're not going to flip halfway through and try and do another genre of esports. They're real endorsement deals, and for our industry in Formula One or in motorsport racing and sim racing, you could land up with a permanent seat in the team, driving for real, where a year ago you were on your couch in your parents' basement. So
sounds like you're putting the call out to any budding racers out there, mate. A quick question from Twitter, which I want to put out to all of you, is there a correlation between playing a game like FIFA and watching traditional football? For example, does playing Messi in FIFA lead to watching Messi live on La Liga?
It'd be anecdotal, but I think ultimately, if you break down esports into the games that involve traditional sports and then those that don't, there's certainly a greater correlation between people who play FIFA and also watch EPL, or play 2K and also watch the NBA, as opposed to people who play League of Legends and watch any form of sport. So there is a correlation, but I don't know if there's any data to support.
I completely agree with you. I think certainly my gaming started when I was really interested in ice hockey. So I was playing in NHL and got friends involved, interested in football. I was playing FIFA. I didn't start playing League of Legends or Overwatch until later on down the track. So certainly traditional sports can set the standard when it comes to esports within the sporting titles.
Yeah, and I think in the States in particular, there's actually a very large correlation between the increase in popularity of soccer in the States and the popularity of FIFA. FIFA's perennially been one of the most popular sports-specific video game titles in the U.S. And I think as growing up, we didn't have much access to soccer in the States, right? It wasn't really put on television. Even the best leagues in the world, the MLS was, barely existent and had a pretty low level of play. People weren't, really encouraged to play it growing up. That just wasn't, one of the sports that we played, or a lot of people played, or you knew a lot of people that played. And then over time, as FIFA started, becoming more and more popular, everyone played, of course. And when you play, you learn, right? And that's always one of the problems with, growing up in the States is that, here you have, a good soccer league, and you root for your hometown team, or where your parents are from. Or if you're in Europe, you root for your hometown team because you see the best players in the world. In the States, we don't have that. I mean, of course, the MLS is now growing, and we're attracting better players, but we don't have that. So how do we familiarize ourselves? How do we become true fans when we don't have anyone to cheer for, or any team to cheer for? And what happens when you start playing FIFA a lot is, hey, I just beat my buddy with this particular team. I think I kind of like them. I'm going to keep playing with them. Hey, I now learned all the guys on the team and their tendencies. I now learned their formations. I now learned about their style of play. I learned about their rivals and the other teams in their league. I learned about how these leagues are structured and the format and the rules of the game. And then all of a sudden you say, hey, let me turn on the TV and watch them, or let me go online and find a stream and watch the actual team. And I think that's created incredible fandom of soccer in the States. And now, of course, you see a lot of the deals in the U.S. market with the British Premier League, for example, and some of the other leagues as well. But I definitely think there's a very strong correlation between the popularity of each.
You've actually seen that already transcend into the professional sport because AS Roma just recently launched or unveiled their new stand. And part of that stand actually has an esports component where season ticket holders, such as my demographic, can still go along, but take their kids, and the kids are actually playing FIFA while Roma are playing Juventus. And so to see that already happening within the infrastructure itself, within the stadia, is absolutely phenomenal.
Just quickly going back to capitalising on esports, and particularly the fans as well. They're a very sophisticated bunch, and unlike traditional sports, if you burn them once, there's really no coming back. They're a very unforgiving bunch. I think it was maybe last year or the year before in DreamHack, there was a Venom movie basically coming out, and they decided, great, it's a perfect sort of millennial type movie. We've got a 60-second trailer. Do you know what? There's going to be a bit of a break inside the tournament. We're going to run a 60-second trailer TVC inside it, and but they were absolutely torn to shreds. There were forums on Reddit going for days upon days, just absolutely shit canning the movie. Are there examples of what to do and what not to do, especially in this space? Ben, you mentioned it's kind of not rocket science, but you don't want to get it wrong at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of the same principles that we're applying to sport. I think things like the example you just mentioned, though, and pre-rolls and mid-rolls and those types of things. I mean, I'm 41, and I hate when I want to watch a cat video, I don't want to see 30 seconds or have to skip that ad. I mean, we're all like that, and I think that's an easy entry point at the moment for brands. We want to get involved in esports. You see a lot of people flocking to Twitch and putting up a completely irrelevant ad at the start of every feed that people want to watch, and I think that's an easy way to go wrong. It needs to be, if you're going to get involved, I think content is key. It needs to be embedded content. It needs to be, there's a lot of brands getting involved who really aren't authentic to esports. But if you can add to the community, if you can add information, provide profiles, provide background, provide stats, make the experience better than what it would have been beforehand, that's the sort of stuff that gets embraced by the fans. But that's, again, it's not rocket science. It's the same sort of strategy or formula that we would advise our brands as they enter sports as well. So in that way, I think it's very similar.
Dharpan, you've got a lot of brand partners who have a lot of legacy and history in this space. Have you gotten much pushback from them when they've come on board, when they've upped their spend potentially and said, you know what, I'll jump on board with the Shadow program as well, but by the way, I want to retrofit my my TV spot or my other above the line spot into this new product?
I think Ben, you nailed it. At the end of the day, it's not rocket science; it's common sense. So if you want to talk to our McLaren sim racing audience, and you are Dell, who's a partner, then you wouldn't be talking to them about analytics as you would to a B2B customer. You'd be talking to them about how Alienware can help add a better experience on a keyboard, and how that can help them gain seconds and create content around value. And I think it's curation. I think it's adding value to their esports journey. And again, you have B2B content creation, you have B2C content creation, and there's no difference. We've been doing this for all of our brands, whether that's Shandong, SAP, OnePlus, who we signed just this week. But whatever it is, you have an audience. You need to know how to talk to that audience, and esports is no difference. Add value, be honest, and you'll get the respect.
And I think when you talk about content in esports, it's already starting to and will continue to mimic content in traditional sports more and more in terms of the type of content that's out there, especially when you're talking about esports and professional events. Our team, among quite a few others in across North America and Europe, we built out a full-scale production studio at our team headquarters to create content, pre and post game shows, analysis shows, game reviews, features on our players and coaches and teams, all that kind of stuff like you have around other sports. In the States, if we're an NBA fan, there is literally any kind of content we want to find about the NBA, we can find it. There are animated shows about the NBA. There's literally anything you want. There are documentaries made. There's this, there's that. As a result, a lot of brand partners or sponsors can find the type of content that makes sense for their particular brand, because there are all of those different types of content that are looking to achieve different things and reach different people in a different way. And I think that for a long time, esports was very focused from a content perspective on just the live events, right? You had these grand events and then not much else every other day of the week. And I think that, of course, you have streams, but that's still, a live event in its own sense. And I think that now you're seeing more and more of this ancillary content built around it, and you're seeing additional brand partners and sponsors, make their way into it. Like our team created a piece of content that Columbia Records sponsored and had some of their music artists involved in, and it was a produced piece with some of them and some that were some of their artists that were gamers, and some of our players and them spending time together and chatting about their favorite games and this and that. And those are all different types of content that didn't necessarily exist in this space a few years back, but that's a cool and authentic way for them as a brand to be involved in esports and reach the young people that are watching esports in a way that, like you said, the people watching aren't like, why am I seeing this and why are they presenting this to me? So as the type of content continues to grow, so will the opportunities to find that authentic fit.
We have exactly 5 minutes left. I want to give you guys exactly 1 minute. Your 5-year crystal ball forecast. What's going to happen in the world of esports next? Maybe starting from you, Rossi.
I think it's already been announced that in the Asian Games there's now a gold medal within esports. So I just expect them to continue to see the industry erode into traditional and sports, and then hopefully merge and be seen as an equal. We shouldn't be, hopefully this time next year, we won't be talking about esports as a disruptor. It should be within the actual mainstream. It should be easily accessible to everybody, and then talked about as individual titles. As I said, we're still talking about esports as an entire industry, not League of Legends, not F1. So certainly I think within the next 5 years, you're going to see a lot more mainstream media coverage. Yeah,
I think just to quickly mention one thing about what you were saying, I think that's a great point. And One of the first things that we were told when we started learning about esports was that, esports is the equivalent of sports, right? Sports is a very general term. It's any competitive event is a sport. Within esports, there are all those different games, like you said. Just like we would differentiate, we understand that the NBA and that structure and fans and the way they monetize and everything is different, and the players are different to the NHL and the MLB and the NFL. It's the same thing within esports. They're all different leagues, different titles, different players, different coaches, styles, and everything else. My quick prediction would be, and you're already starting to see it, is that esports teams and organizations will start to be valued more than the big four North American sports. Cloud9 just raised around $50 million at a $350 million valuation. That puts them their valuation above some of the lower level NHL teams or equivalent to some of the lower level NHL teams. There are quite a few esports organizations now that have $150 million plus valuations. There's some that have received $150 million plus full buyout offers. A couple more that have raised at $200 million plus valuations, and I think that but next year at this time there'll be a solid handful of teams that are valued more than NHL organizations and lower level MLB organizations as well.
Well, I think right now, esports is already the equivalent in terms of structured participation of sports in this country. I mean, Fortnite's the second biggest sport in Australia in terms of structured participation, at about 850,000 unique Australians playing it every month, behind only football. If you extrapolate that to the top 20 sports in Australia, 8 of them are individual computer games in terms of structured participation. I think in this country, and we've heard today about some of the amazing stuff that's going on in terms of high performance in North America, and I think in this country, it's that professionalism that's starting to flow through with the inclusion of some of the AFL clubs that are getting involved. I know our team certainly aspires to start including dietitians, psychologists, that sort of stuff in our programs. But on the commercial side, I think it's, and the point was well made, we tend to throw a blanket over esports. It tends to be this generalised term. From a marketing perspective, we'll start to get more granular in our data. We'll start to better understand the consumer in Counter-Strike, how many of them are going to buy a motor vehicle in the next 12 months. The sort of data that we already understand in sports and we utilise to commercialise, we'll start getting that level of granular consumer data that allows us to lift the amount of investment into esports.
Dharpan.
I think what I'd like to see in the next 5 years is the next Formula One world champion coming from a small African country or from Myanmar or from Bangladesh or where, developing nations where these kids have never had access or could never even dream of getting into the sports. I'd love to see them change the sport and more diversity coming into our industry. I'd like to hope that by our sim racing initiatives that we can attract more females and more women into our sport as well, which is very male dominated. And I'd love to see a gold medal as well, which would be pretty cool.
Outstanding. Gents, thanks so much. You all have a good cross-sectional expertise when it comes to esports, and it's great to have you all in a room and have that discussion. No doubt some of our delegates might pull you aside later and accost you with many, many more questions. So, ladies and gents, thank you so much for listening to us, and please give it up for the awesome panellists.